Look at him and his rusty bicycle. How does he intend marrying the rich man's daughter with no money? Look at the real man for the rich man's second daughter. I'm sure the first daughter will regret marrying that poor man.
Their father was on his deathbed when he called his two daughters and gave them one final instruction each. One daughter listened quietly, but the other suddenly broke down and demanded something that was never meant to be hers. She wanted the life her sister had been promised, and she was willing to tear their family apart to get it. Her mother begged, her sister remained silent, and before that night was over, a decision was made that would change the lives of both sisters forever. But what nobody knew was that the daughter who appeared to have lost everything was actually walking straight into a future neither of them could have imagined. Mr. Dan was a respected man in his community. He was not the richest man in the village, but he had worked hard all his life to give his family a peaceful and stable home. He and his wife Benita had two daughters, Caroline and Gloria. Caroline was the firstborn. She was gentle, patient, hardworking, and humble. She rarely argued with her parents, and whenever there was a problem between her and Gloria, Caroline was usually the one who let it go. She loved her younger sister deeply, even when Gloria took advantage of her kindness. Gloria was beautiful, but she had grown used to getting whatever she wanted. If she asked her mother for something, Benita found it difficult to say no. And whenever the sisters had an argument, Benita would often turn to Caroline and say, "You are the elder one, just forgive your sister." Caroline would swallow her anger and remain quiet. She never wanted small disagreements to destroy the bond between them. But as the years passed, Mr. Dan's health began to fail. One evening, when he knew his strength was leaving him, he asked Benita to bring both girls into his room. Caroline sat beside his bed while Gloria stood near the window. Mr. Dan looked at them for a long moment before speaking. "My daughters, there is something I must tell you before I leave this world." Caroline immediately became worried. "Daddy, please don't talk like that," she said softly. Mr. Dan smiled weakly. "My child, listen to me. I have lived my life and I know my time is near. There are things I must put in order before I go." He reached for Caroline's hand. "Caroline, many years ago, long before you and Paul were born, your Uncle Alfred and I made a promise. We agreed that one day our children would marry and our families would remain united." Caroline looked at him quietly. "Paul is Alfred's only son," Mr. Dan continued. "He has grown into a successful young man, and I want you to marry him." Caroline was surprised. She had heard of Paul, but she had never really thought about marrying him. "Daddy, if this is truly what you want, I will respect your decision," she replied. Mr. Dan squeezed her hand. "I knew I could trust you." Then he turned to Gloria. His expression became softer. "Gloria, your situation is different. I want you to marry Mark, the son of Mr. Tony." Gloria's face immediately changed. "Mark?" she asked. Mr. Dan nodded. "Yes, you may not understand why, but I have a reason." He looked at Benita. "Your mother was carrying Gloria when something terrible happened. She went into labor and things became dangerous. She was losing blood and there was no help nearby. Mr. Tony carried her through the night and made sure she reached a place where she could receive help. Without him, your mother and Gloria might not be alive today." Gloria lowered her eyes. Mr. Dan continued, "I have never forgotten what that man did for her family. I made him a promise and I intend to keep it. Mark is his only son. I want you to marry him." Gloria said nothing for several seconds. Finally, she nodded reluctantly. "All right, Daddy." Mr. Dan looked at both daughters. "Promise me you will honor my wishes?" Caroline answered immediately, "I promise." Gloria hesitated before quietly saying, "I promise to." Mr. Dan smiled. unaware that one of his daughters had already begun imagining a completely different future. Weeks later, Mr. Dan passed away. His funeral was attended by relatives, friends, and respected people from nearby communities. Among the guests was Mr. Alfred, who arrived with his only son, Paul. The moment Gloria saw Paul, something changed inside her. He was handsome, confident, well-dressed, and wealthy. People around him spoke about his successful businesses and the luxurious life he lived. Gloria watched him from across the gathering. Caroline noticed her sister staring. "Gloria," she whispered, "why are you looking at him like that?" Gloria smiled. "He's handsome." Caroline nodded. "Yes, but remember what Daddy told us." Gloria looked at her. "I know," but her eyes returned to Paul. She had already forgotten about Mark. To Gloria, Paul represented everything she wanted: wealth, luxury, beautiful houses, expensive clothes, and a life where she would never struggle. Caroline, however, was different. She knew Paul was supposed to be her husband, but she was not excited because of his money. She barely spoke to him. Instead, she noticed Mark, who remained in the background helping with the funeral. He carried chairs, served food, helped elderly guests, and quietly made sure everything was in order. When Caroline saw him struggling to lift a heavy bench, she walked over. "Let me help you," she said. Mark smiled. "No, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to," Caroline replied. "I just want to." Mark looked at her with surprise. "Thank you." Caroline smiled and walked away, not knowing that this simple moment would become important later. After the mourning period, Benita called her daughters into the living room. "Your father's family has contacted us," she said. "Paul's family and Mark's family will soon come for the introductions and bride price ceremonies." Before she could finish, Gloria suddenly began crying. Benita stared at her. "Gloria, what is wrong?" "I don't want to marry Mark," she cried. "What did you just say?" Benita asked. "I said I don't want him. I want Paul." Caroline looked at her sister in disbelief. "Gloria, you cannot be serious." Gloria turned toward her. "I am very serious. I want Paul." Benita shook her head. "Your father gave you clear instructions before he died." Gloria wiped her tears. "I don't care what Daddy said. I cannot marry that poor man." "That poor man?" Benita asked angrily. "His father saved your life." "And I am grateful," Gloria shouted. "But gratitude does not mean I have to spend the rest of my life with him." Benita stared at her daughter. "Then what do you expect me to do?" Gloria pointed toward Caroline. "Let me marry Paul." Caroline's expression hardened. "No." Gloria looked at her. "What did you say?" "I said no. Paul was chosen for me, and I will not give him to you." Gloria's eyes filled with anger. "So you want to watch me suffer?" Caroline shook her head. "This is not about suffering. Daddy made a decision, and we both promised to respect it." Gloria stood up. "Then I will leave this house." Benita quickly grabbed her hand. "Please, Gloria, calm down." "No, Mama. If you force me to marry Mark, I will leave and never come back." She rushed into the bedroom, packed her clothes into a bag, and returned to the living room. "I am serious. I would rather leave this family than marry him." Benita began to panic. "Gloria, please, put that bag down." "No." Then Benita turned slowly toward Caroline. Her eyes filled with tears. "Caroline, please." Caroline looked at her mother. "Please what?" Benita's voice trembled. "Give Paul to your sister." Caroline froze. "Mama, what are you saying?" Benita moved closer. "You are strong. You can handle anything. Gloria cannot." "So, because I am strong, I must lose everything?" Caroline asked, her voice breaking. Benita began to cry. "I am begging you." Caroline stared at her mother, then at Gloria, who stood silently with her bag in her hand. She knew exactly what she was being asked to sacrifice. She knew Paul was wealthy. She knew marrying him could completely change her life. But she also knew she could not bear the thought of losing her sister forever. After a long silence, Caroline finally whispered, "All right." Benita looked up. "What?" Caroline swallowed her tears. "I will give Paul to Gloria." Gloria's face immediately brightened. Caroline continued, "But I will never forget that I was asked to give up my future for this." She walked into her bedroom, closed the door, and finally allowed herself to cry. She had given up the man she was supposed to marry because she loved her family. What Caroline did not know was that the future she thought she had just lost was nothing compared to the future that was waiting for her. Neither Paul nor Mark knew that the two families had originally chosen different wives for them. They simply trusted their parents and believed everything had been arranged for a reason. When Paul finally met Gloria, he was pleased. Gloria was beautiful, confident, and carried herself like someone who already belonged in a wealthy home. Paul smiled at her during their first meeting. "I have heard so much about you," he said. Gloria smiled back. "I hope only good things?" "Very good things," Paul replied. "You seem happy." "I am," Gloria said, hiding her excitement. In her mind, she was already imagining the mansion, expensive cars, jewelry, and beautiful clothes that would soon become part of her life. Mark's meeting with Caroline was completely different. He came dressed simply and sat quietly, almost nervous about speaking. Caroline smiled at him. "You don't have to be nervous." Mark laughed softly. "I'm not used to sitting with people like your family." Caroline shook her head. "You don't have to impress me." Mark looked at her. "Then what do you want to know?" Caroline thought for a moment. "Tell me about yourself." Mark was surprised. "About myself?" "Yes. What do you want to become? What are your dreams?" Mark smiled. For the first time, he felt someone was interested in him rather than what he owned. He told her about his father, the small business they had, and how he hoped to build something of his own someday. Caroline listened carefully. She never once asked how much money he had. She never asked where he lived or what kind of car he drove. When Mark finished speaking, he looked at her and asked, "You are not disappointed?" Caroline smiled. "Why would I be? Because I don't have much?" Caroline shook her head. "Money can make life easier, Mark, but it cannot make a person kind. That matters more to me." Mark stared at her for a moment. "I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything," Caroline replied with a smile. "Just be yourself." From that moment, Mark became comfortable around her. He knew he had found someone different. As the wedding preparations continued, the difference between the sisters became impossible to ignore. Paul spared no expense for Gloria. He bought her a beautiful designer wedding gown that cost more than some people earned in several years. When Gloria received it, she screamed with excitement. "Caroline, come and see this." Caroline walked into the room and stopped when she saw the gown. Gloria lifted it proudly. "Paul bought this for me." "It is beautiful," Caroline said. Gloria smiled. "I know." She quickly changed into it and began dancing around the room. "Look at me. Can you believe this is my wedding dress?" Caroline smiled politely. "You look beautiful." Gloria stopped dancing and looked at her sister. "You know, Caroline, your life is going to be very different from mine." Caroline remained quiet. Gloria continued, "After my wedding, I will be living in a mansion. I will have servants, expensive cars, and everything I want." Caroline looked at her. "I hope you are happy." Gloria laughed. "And what about you? You will be living with Mark in that little house?" Caroline simply smiled. Gloria moved closer. "Don't pretend you are not jealous." Caroline shook her head.
"I'm not jealous of you, Gloria. Then why do you look so calm?" "Because I have nothing to prove to you." Gloria laughed again. "You will understand soon enough." Caroline said nothing. She could have told Gloria the truth. She could have reminded her that Paul had originally been chosen for her. She could have told her how much she had sacrificed. But she chose silence. She did not want praise. She did not want Gloria to feel guilty. She only wanted peace. Then the wedding day arrived. The church was filled with relatives, friends, and curious villagers. Everyone was dressed beautifully, and people waited outside for the couples to arrive. Mark arrived first. He came riding an old, rusty bicycle. His black and white clothes were clean but simple, and it was obvious he could not afford the expensive suit people expected a groom to wear. The moment he stopped, some people began to laugh. "Is that the groom?" someone whispered. Another person laughed. "Maybe he came to deliver palm wine." A few people laughed loudly. Mark heard them, but he said nothing. He simply locked his bicycle and walked toward the church. Caroline saw him from a distance and immediately walked toward him. "Are you all right?" she asked. Mark smiled. "Yes." "People are laughing at you." Mark shrugged. "Let them laugh." Caroline looked at him sadly. "I'm sorry." Mark shook his head. "Don't be. I may not have money today, but I have you."
"That is enough for me." Caroline smiled through her emotions. "Then let's go inside." A short while later, the sound of a powerful car engine filled the street. Everyone turned around. A luxurious modern car slowly stopped in front of the church. People immediately brought out their phones. Paul stepped out wearing an expensive suit. The crowd became excited. Gloria stepped out shortly afterward, looking radiant in her designer gown. She glanced toward Caroline and gave her a small smile that seemed to say, "Look what I got." Caroline said nothing. The two weddings went ahead. Mark married Mark, while Gloria married Paul. After the ceremonies, Mrs. Benita blessed both couples. She looked at her daughters and believed she had finally done what was best for everyone. She had no idea that the decision she had forced Caroline to make would soon change the destiny of both daughters. Caroline moved into Mark's modest home and reality hit her immediately. There was no luxury furniture, no driver, no servants, and no expensive decorations. Some days, even buying basic things required careful planning. Caroline never complained, but Mark noticed the silence on her face one evening. "Are you unhappy?" he asked. Caroline looked at him. "No." "Then why are you quiet?" She smiled faintly. "I'm just adjusting." Mark lowered his head. "I know I cannot give you what Paul can give Gloria." Caroline reached for his hand. "Mark, stop comparing yourself to Paul. But you deserve better." "I deserve a good husband," she replied, "and you have been good to me." Mark looked at her eyes. "I promise you, Caroline, I may not have money today, but I will work until I can give you a comfortable life." Caroline squeezed his hand. "I don't need a mansion. I don't need expensive cars. I just want a peaceful home with someone who loves me." Mark smiled. "Then I will give you that." The first month passed quietly. They struggled, but they were happy. Then one evening while they were eating dinner, someone knocked on their door. Mark opened it and found an old man standing outside. "Are you Mark, the son of Tony?" he asked. Mark nodded. "Yes, why?" The man handed him a brown envelope. "Your father left this for you. There is something inside you need to see." Mark opened it and froze. "What is this?" Caroline asked. Mark stared at the papers for several seconds. "These are land documents." "Land?" Caroline asked. "What land?" Mark looked at her in disbelief. "I don't know. My father never told me about this." The following morning, they went to inspect the property. When they finally reached the land, both of them stood completely speechless. Stretching before their eyes was an enormous piece of land covered with thousands upon thousands of palm trees. Mark slowly turned toward Caroline. "Caroline?" She looked at him. "What?" Mark swallowed hard. I think my father left us something much bigger than we ever imagined. Neither of them knew that the land beneath their feet was about to change their lives forever. Mr. Tony had not been a wealthy man in the village, at least not in the way people understood wealth. He was known as the village palm wine tapper, and most people assumed that was all he had ever been. But after Mark and Caroline discovered the land, they learned that Mr. Tony had secretly owned a gigantic piece of land covered with more than 20,000 mature palm trees. Mark could hardly believe it. "My father owned all this?" he asked, staring across the land. Caroline nodded slowly. "It is difficult to believe." Mark looked at the old documents again. "He never told me." "Maybe he had his reasons," Caroline replied. "But what are we supposed to do with it?" Mark remembered something his father had once told him. He said that if anyone ever offered a serious price for the land, I should sell it. Caroline looked at him. Then maybe he knew it was valuable. Mark shook his head. "I always thought my father was just a poor palm wine tapper. I never imagined he owned something like this." A few days later, something unexpected happened. A group of foreign investors arrived in the area. They had been searching for a large piece of land for an agricultural and real estate development project, and after hearing about Mark's property, they asked to inspect it. Mark was nervous as he walked around the land with them. The investors examined the documents, measured the property, studied the palm trees, and discussed among themselves. Finally, their leader turned to Mark. "Mr. Mark, we are prepared to make you an offer." Mark looked at him. "For the land?" "Yes." The man mentioned the amount, and Mark went completely silent. He looked at Caroline as if waiting for her to tell him that he had heard wrongly. "Did he just say that amount?" Caroline whispered. Mark nodded slowly. "Yes." One of the investors smiled. "We understand it is a lot of money, but the land is exactly what we need." Mark looked at the document in his hands. "Are you sure this is not a mistake?" The investor laughed softly. "No, Mr. Mark, we have done our calculations." Caroline gently touched Mark's arm. "Mark, what do you think?" He looked at her. "I don't know. My father told me to sell if the right buyer came. I never expected this." Caroline smiled. "Then perhaps this is the opportunity he was preparing you for." Mark thought about it for a long moment before finally saying, "All right, I accept." Within weeks, the deal was completed and Mark's life changed completely. The same man who had arrived at his wedding on a rusty bicycle was suddenly in a position where people were waiting for his decisions. But Mark did not allow the money to change his heart. His first concern was Caroline. One evening, he walked into their small home and said, "Pack your things." Caroline looked confused. "Why?" Mark smiled. "We are leaving." "Where are we going?" "To our new home." Caroline laughed. "What new home?" Mark took her hand. "You will see." When they arrived in the city, Caroline stepped out of the car and stared at the enormous mansion in front of her. She looked at Mark, then back at the house. "Mark, whose house is this?" He smiled. "Ours." Caroline's mouth fell open. She slowly walked inside and stopped. Huge rooms surrounded her. Beautiful furniture filled the house. There were luxury cars outside, a swimming pool behind the mansion, and a massive garden stretching across the property. Caroline turned to her husband. "How did all this happen so quickly?" Mark smiled. "I honestly don't know. Sometimes I still feel like I'm going to wake up and find myself back on that bicycle." Caroline laughed. "You remember the bicycle? How could I forget?" he replied. "People laughed at me that day." Caroline became quiet. "And now, look at you." Mark shook his head. "Don't look at me like that. None of this matters if I lose the person who stood beside me when I had nothing." Caroline smiled and held his hand. You will never lose me. But Mark wasn't satisfied with simply selling the land. He used part of the money to start a real estate company with the foreign investors. They were impressed by his honesty, patience, and ability to make careful decisions. The business grew faster than anyone expected. Projects began appearing in different cities, and within 1 year, Mark had become extraordinarily wealthy. Yet, at home, he was still the same man Caroline had married. One evening, Caroline looked at him and asked, "Do you ever think about how different our lives are now?" Mark smiled. "Every day." "Do you ever regret that I chose you?" Mark immediately shook his head. "Never. Even though you had nothing when we married, Caroline, you gave me something money could never buy. You believed in me before there was anything to believe in." Caroline smiled. "And you gave me something too." "What?" "Peace." A few months later, Caroline discovered she was pregnant. Mark was overjoyed. He placed his hands gently on her stomach and whispered, "I hope our child grows up knowing that money is not what makes a person valuable." Caroline smiled. "You will teach them that." When the day finally came, Caroline gave birth to twins. Mark rushed to the hospital and stood beside her bed with tears in his eyes. When the nurse placed the babies in his arms, he could not hold back his emotions. He looked at the twins and then at Caroline. "We really have a family," he whispered. Caroline smiled weakly. "Yes, we do." Mark looked down at his children and remembered everything. The small house, the rusty bicycle, the wedding guests who laughed at him, and the people who had judged him because he had no money. None of them knew what his father had left behind. Caroline watched her husband holding their children and smiled. "You know something?" she whispered. Mark looked at her. "What?" "I have never regretted giving up Paul." Mark's eyes filled with emotion. "And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." Caroline smiled as she looked at their twins. She had thought she was sacrificing her future when she gave Paul to Gloria. She never knew that the man she was pushed toward would one day become incredibly wealthy. But more importantly, he would become the loving husband and father she had always deserved. While Caroline's life was changing in ways she never expected, Gloria's dream was slowly falling apart. Paul had inherited control of his father's business, and at first, Gloria believed nothing could ever go wrong. They still lived in a beautiful mansion, drove expensive cars, and attended lavish events. But Paul was not like his father. He had never learned how to manage money properly. "We have more than enough," he would tell Gloria whenever she questioned his spending. "My father built this company from nothing. I cannot finish everything he worked for." Gloria would laugh. "Then enjoy your life. What is the point of being rich if you cannot spend?" Paul listened to her. He bought expensive cars, threw huge parties, and spent enormous amounts of money trying to impress people. When his managers warned him that the company was losing money, he ignored them. One evening, his accountant entered his office looking worried. "Sir, we need to talk." Paul barely looked up from his phone. "About what?" "The company's debts are becoming serious." Paul frowned. "How serious?" The accountant hesitated. "Very serious. Some of our investments have failed and several creditors are demanding payment." Paul waved his hand. "Handle it." "Sir, it is not that simple." Paul finally looked up. "Are you telling me I cannot handle my own company?" "No, sir. I am only saying that we need to reduce spending immediately." Paul leaned back. "My father never had this problem." The accountant quietly replied, "Your father also did not spend the way you do." Paul became angry. "Are you questioning me?" The man lowered his eyes. "No, sir." But the warnings continued. Debts accumulated, investments failed, employees began resigning because salaries were delayed. Creditors started arriving at the office, yet Paul continued spending as if nothing had changed. Gloria never stopped him. She enjoyed the lifestyle too much. "Paul, you should buy that car," she would tell him. "You deserve it." "Don't you think we should be careful?" Paul sometimes asked. Gloria would laugh. "Careful? You are a billionaire." She had no idea that the word billionaire was about to disappear from their lives. Eventually, the bank came for the mansion. Gloria stood in the living room staring at the officials as they explained that the property had been seized because of Paul's unpaid debts. "This cannot be happening," she whispered. Paul stood silently. "Where are we going?" Gloria asked. Paul looked away. "To my father's old house." Gloria stared at him in disbelief. "You mean that old house?" "For now." She shook her head. "Paul, you told me everything would be fine." Paul sighed. "I thought it would." "You thought?" Gloria shouted. "You kept telling me not to worry." Paul looked at her. "And you kept telling me to spend." Gloria became silent. She had no answer. They moved into the old family house, and the woman who once danced in designer clothes now struggled to accept her new reality. But even after losing the mansion, Paul still believed the company would recover. It did not. More debts came, more creditors arrived. Eventually, the company was taken away from him. The empire his father had spent years building was gone. The luxury cars disappeared. The parties stopped. The expensive clothes became memories. Gloria had no children, no wealth, and no glamorous life left to enjoy. Then, one day, Mrs. Benita came to visit her. Gloria opened the door and immediately saw the disappointment on her mother's face. "Mama, why are you here?" "I came to see you." She stepped aside. "Come in." They sat quietly for a moment. Then Benita said, "I heard what happened." Gloria looked away. "Everyone knows." Her mother sighed. "I am sorry." Gloria laughed bitterly. "Sorry will not bring our life back." Benita looked at her daughter. "You should not speak like that." "What should I say, Mama? That I am happy?" Benita remained quiet. Then she made the mistake of mentioning Caroline.
Your sister is doing well. Gloria's face tightened. What does that have to do with me? Everything is going well for her. Mark's land was sold to foreign investors. Gloria slowly turned toward her mother. What land? Benita continued. The land Mr. Tony left for him, it was worth a fortune. Gloria's expression changed. Are you saying Mark is rich? Very rich, Benita replied. He built a successful real estate business with the investors. Gloria stared at her mother. And Caroline? She lives in a beautiful mansion now. Gloria's breathing became heavier. A mansion? Benita nodded. And she has twins. Gloria looked down at her hands. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she whispered, Caroline has children? Yes. Gloria's face tightened with jealousy. The sister she had once mocked for marrying a poor man was now living a life better than anything Gloria had imagined. It is not fair, Gloria suddenly said. Benita frowned. What is not fair? Everything. I was supposed to have that life. Gloria. No, Mama. You told me Caroline would marry Paul. You begged her to give him to me. I was supposed to be the one living in that mansion. Benita sighed. You made your choice. Gloria shook her head. No, Caroline took my destiny. Her mother stared at her. What are you talking about? Gloria stood up. I should have married Mark. Benita's eyes widened. You refused to marry him? Because I did not know he would become rich, she shouted. Benita shook her head. So that is what you are angry about? Gloria had no answer. Deep inside, she knew her mother was right. But jealousy had already taken control of her heart. She began thinking about Caroline, Mark, the mansion, the twins, and the life she believed should have been hers. That night, Gloria made a decision. She would find Mark. She would tell him everything. She convinced herself that Caroline had stolen the life that belonged to her. And without telling her mother or anyone else, Gloria secretly went to look for Mark. Gloria arrived at Mark's mansion without telling Caroline. She stood outside the huge gate for a moment, staring at the house she once thought Caroline had no right to live in. She took a deep breath before the security guard allowed her inside. When Mark saw her, surprise immediately crossed his face. Gloria, what are you doing here? He asked. Gloria looked seriously at him.
I came because there is something you need to know. Mark frowned. What is it? Gloria stepped closer. You married the wrong sister. Mark stared at her. What? Your marriage to Caroline was never supposed to happen. My father was supposed to give me to you. Caroline was the one who was supposed to marry Paul. Mark remained silent. Gloria continued. But Caroline took my place. She knew I was supposed to marry you, yet she married you anyway. Mark listened without interrupting. Gloria's voice became more emotional. You need to understand that I am the woman who should have been your wife. Caroline deceived you and took my place. Mark finally spoke. Why are you telling me this now? Gloria hesitated. Because the truth should be known. Mark looked at her carefully. No, you are telling me because you regret your choice. Gloria's face changed. That is not true. Mark shook his head. Then answer one question for me.
Why didn't you marry me when you had the chance? Gloria opened her mouth, but no words came out. Mark continued calmly. When you were given the opportunity, you refused me. You said I was too poor. You wanted Paul because he had money. Gloria looked away. I made a mistake. Yes, Mark replied, you did. Gloria looked back at him. But that doesn't mean Caroline should have taken my place. Mark's expression became serious. Caroline did not take anything from you. You gave it up. Gloria fell silent. Mark continued. Do you remember the first day Caroline came into my life? I had almost nothing. I did not have this house. I did not have this business. I did not even have a proper wedding suit. Gloria lowered her eyes. She knew. Yes, Mark said. And she still chose me. She never laughed at my clothes. She never complained about my rusty bicycle. She never asked how much money I had. She never looked at me as if I was beneath her. He paused. Do you know what she told me? Gloria said nothing. She told me she did not need riches. She only wanted a peaceful home with someone who loved her. Gloria's eyes began to fill with tears. Mark continued. Caroline loved me before the land, before the mansion, before the business, before anyone knew my name. He looked directly at Gloria. So even if you were the woman my father originally intended for me, what exactly do you want me to do now? Gloria had no answer. Leave Caroline? Mark asked. Take you as my wife? Gloria remained silent. I cannot do that, he said firmly. Caroline is my wife. I love her and I will never abandon her because you suddenly discovered that the man you rejected became wealthy. Gloria's face fell. She had come expecting Mark to question his marriage, but instead, every word he spoke made her feel smaller. She slowly stood up. I understand, she whispered. Mark nodded. I hope one day you will understand something else. Money did not make Caroline worthy of me. Her heart did. Gloria walked out of the mansion with tears in her eyes. For the first time, she understood that what Caroline had possessed all along was something money could never buy. When Mark returned home that evening, Caroline immediately noticed that something was wrong. You look serious, she said. Mark sat beside her. Gloria came to see me. Caroline looked surprised. Gloria? Yes. She told me everything. Caroline became quiet. What did she tell you? Mark looked at her. She said you took her place. She said you were supposed to marry Paul and she was supposed to marry me. Caroline lowered her eyes. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she sighed. She is right. Mark stared at her. What? Caroline finally told him the truth. She explained how Gloria had refused to marry him because she wanted Paul. She told him how Gloria had packed her clothes and threatened to leave the family. She told him how her mother had knelt before her and begged her to give Paul to Gloria. I was afraid of losing my sister, Caroline said quietly, so I agreed. Mark stared in disbelief. You gave Paul to her because of me? Caroline nodded. I didn't know what the future would bring. I only knew I didn't want my family to fall apart. Mark suddenly began laughing. Caroline looked confused. Why are you laughing? Mark shook his head. Because this is unbelievable. Caroline started laughing too.
What is? Mark looked at her. You sacrificed a billionaire for your sister, and the man you were forced to marry ended up becoming wealthy too? Caroline smiled. Life is strange. Mark pulled her into his arms. If I had to choose all over again, I would still choose you. Caroline looked at him. Even if you knew how everything would turn out? Especially then, Mark replied. Years later, Caroline sat peacefully in the garden of their beautiful mansion while her twins played nearby. Mark sat beside her, watching their children laugh. For a moment, Caroline remembered the woman she had once been. She remembered her father's final instructions. She remembered Gloria's tears. She remembered her mother's desperate plea. She remembered giving up Paul. She remembered Mark arriving at the church on his rusty bicycle while people laughed at him. She remembered the small house, the difficult days, and the moment they discovered the land that changed everything. Caroline smiled as she watched her family. What once felt like the greatest loss of her life had become her greatest blessing. Gloria had believed wealth was everything. She had rejected Mark because he was poor and fought for Paul because he was rich. But in the end, she lost the billionaire she wanted, lost the wealth she thought would make her happy, and lost the chance to build a loving family with a man who would have cherished her. Caroline, on the other hand, never chased wealth. She chose kindness, loyalty, and love, even when doing so cost her the future she thought she wanted. And that was the lesson life taught both sisters. Never envy another person's destiny. Sometimes the thing you fight desperately to possess is the very thing that will bring you sorrow, while the path you reject may be the one leading you to the blessing you never knew you needed. Caroline did not become happy simply because Mark became rich. She was happy because she had chosen a man who loved her when he had nothing. And in the end, the sister who believed she had stolen Caroline's future unknowingly pushed her toward a better one.